On the 12th of April 1914, Teatro La Fenice joined the growing list of opera houses around the world to give a staged production of Wagner's Parsifal, following the expiry of the 30-year Bayreuth prohibition on 31st of December 1913. It was only the seventh Italian city to take advantage of this, following Bologna and Rome in January, Milan later that month, Trieste, Pisa, and Turin in March. Il Gazzettino in Venice reported the landmark event with a certain ironic view of the religious aspects of the staging. A low murmur spread through the theatre, but one of admiration, while the sacred rite unfolded with a solemnity enough to shame those at the Sistine Chapel. A sense of pity, however, filled the heart of the public at the sight of the Povero Cristo of Parsifal, obliged to stay stock still and worse, without understanding anything of what was happening before him. This might have confirmed Wagner's own prejudices against the cultural tastes of the people in whose city he died, as he wrote just days before his death in his final letter to Angelo Neumann, who was negotiating the first international tour of the complete ring cycle in German. Are you really contemplating Venice? I fear that would be an unlucky notion. For all of the Italian cities, Venice is certainly the least progressive, yet I myself should not advise you to try any of the others. After a slow start with the anachronistic choice of Rienzi in 1874, Venice began to embrace the music of its most famous recently dead foreign resident with something of the zeal of the convert. Venetian critics continued to relate Wagner to French grand opera, even in the 1890s, with the Catholic newspaper La Difesa's critic associating the psychology of Tannhäuser not unapprovingly with Meyerbeer's Roberto il Diavolo, which must again have had Wagner turning in his grave. But quite quickly, the ambition or necessity of having one Wagner opera during the main Carnevale Quaresima season became a regular part of the theatre's negotiations with both impresari and the Comune. This paper addresses three key questions about the significance of religion in opera in the Venice of liberal Italy. First, I situate the social and political profile of the Fenice management and membership within the turbulent municipal politics of the 1890s, the brief laicizing regime under Riccardo Selvatico, and the rapid entrenchment of the clerico-moderate administration under Filippo Grimani, which dominated the city until the advent of fascism. I then relate arguments about the financing and utility of opera within the wider divisions between cultural conservatives and progressives, in which religion was such a significant factor. Thirdly, from the critical and political reception of repertoire at Fenice, I draw conclusions about the growing significance of religious themes of religion and transcendence within opera during this period. The primary sources on which my research is based include the municipal archives in Venice and the archive of Teatro La Fenice. The only recent research on the management of the theatre in this period is an article by Jutta Tolla covering the period to 1897. She concludes that the Fenice was rescued from decline only by the revival of Venice as a tourist destination at the end of the century through staging spring and summer stagioni di bagni. My research broadens out this approach to consider the place of opera within the wider political and religious debates which were central to Venice in this period. Furthermore, my research has highlighted that existing chronologies and research on Venice has ignored key sources, including the archives of the Comune and local press. Venice's unique history as an imperial republic and a former province of the Habsburg Empire shaped its response to integration into the new Italian state from 1866. Similarly, the fault line between the new state, its liberal support base, and Catholic adherents was coloured in Venice by the city's particular religious history, stretching back at least to the interdicts of the 16th and 17th centuries. The moderate liberal majority among the Venetian elite had been largely disconnected from Risorgimento politics. In the first decade after 1866, in fact, a decade or more, some of these leading liberals were less suspicious of the intentions of Catholic conservatives towards the new state than national politicians wanted, while the progressisti were seen as more benign. For example, Sindaco Antonio Fornoni, who'd be a major figure at La Fenice as well, wrote to the prefect, also in Venice there is a struggle between the party of the church on the one side and the liberals on the other, more or less progressive. There is a small network of ultra-conservative moderates, and then there are lots of gradations of moderate liberals. Among the clericals and ultra-conservatives, there spread some exaggerations. Among the progressives, there isn't one who seriously holds to radicalism. During the 1880s, although the papal ban on political participation in the new Italian state continued, Catholics began mobilizing at a local level, and this began to bear fruit in councillors elected across the Veneto. In 1889, electoral reforms in Venice made a modest widening of the franchise, and a new generation from across the political spectrum emerged, including art critic and historian Pompeo Molmenti, antiquarian Michelangelo Guggenheim, poet and playwright Riccardo Selvatico, and teacher Giovanni Bordiga. By 1890, the progressisti were in the ascendant, with Riccardo Selvatico as mayor, even though the Sindaco Poeta, as he was nicknamed, was also known less flatteringly as the Sindaco di Paglia, the mayor of straw, supposedly the front man for his more radical colleagues, including Sebastiano Tecchio, who was the director of the radical newspaper L'Adriatico that became the mouthpiece for the administration. And there's a quick summary of the main political administrations through this period. The programme of the Selvatico administration was strongly secular, with an agenda to laicise public education and charity, along with new cultural initiatives, which was partly inspired and enabled by Crispi's national persecution of Catholic institutions and structures. In particular, the opere pie, charitable institutions traditionally run by the church, were reformed, and the requirement for religious education was repealed. Bordiga's programme to restrict religious education in public schools and to ban prayers at the beginning and close of lessons and the display of crucifixes drove moderate liberals, including Molmenti and the liberal newspaper La Gazzetta, further away from the programme of the junta, preparing the way for a realignment of political forces. Crispi's volte-face on seeking a rapprochement with the church further undermined the Selvatico regime's political base. As Alberto Banti reminds us, symbols and monuments were crucial tools in the post-unification attempts to create a sense of Italian nationhood, and these were often based on Catholic tradition. The first religious cultural flashpoint in Venice in this period was the long-running campaign begun in 1875 to erect a memorial to renegade 16th century priest Paolo Sarpi, which united all but those Catholics who heeded the church's protestations that Sarpi was a heretic rather than a hero. So that's my Selvatico slide. The new political atmosphere encouraged the more anti-clerical to expound Sarpi's virtues in terms of his heterodox anti-papist theology, whereas more moderate liberals like Momenti highlighted his scientific credentials, and Fradaletto, who would go on to be the first director of the Biennale, argued that his theology had always remained Catholic. To Catholic intransigence, this was intolerable hypocrisy about a priest who remained anathematized. A further outrage to clerical opinion was the premiere in July 1894 in the Teatro Malebran of the play Cristo alla Festa di Purim by the Republican Giovanni Bovio. His reimagining of a New Testament story to infuse Christ's mission with a socialist political reading outraged Catholic opinion. Although the Venetian prefect of Venice, the Neapolitan Caracciolo, was more sanguine, writing to the author saying that the play had actually strengthened his faith. And finally, perhaps the greatest cause célèbre in this controversy was the display at the first Biennale in 1895 of the painting by Giacomo Grosso, Il Supremo Convegno, which depicts a group of naked, or depicted, because it hasn't survived, a group of naked women in a church ecstatically draped over the coffin of a shrouded figure given to represent a Don Giovanni character. Setting the nudity aside, the ambience and subject of this painting is highly reminiscent of several operas we could think of, which even the intransigent La Difesa appreciated in context. Roberto il Diavolo, Sansone e Dalila, even the Flower Maidens in Parsifal. One notable point of comparison about these examples is that you could say prose drama and visual art more readily caused severe offence and scandal to religious opinion, whereas opera, in which religious themes, liturgical music, celestial visions were becoming more prevalent, was more easily read as consistent with conventional religiosity or piety. In November 1894, Cardinal Giuseppe Sarto arrived in Venice as the new patriarch and immediately began organising a rapprochement with the moderates to undermine the Selvatico regime. Only fueled by the correspondence he had with Selvatico about the Grosso canvas and his prohibition against priests viewing it at the exhibition. So I'm just going to move on. So where to situate the place of La Fenice in this political and cultural turbulence? La Fenice is generally seen as a musical backwater as Venice joined the new Italian nation, with its period of proud, if not always immediately successful Verdian premieres of the 40s and 50s fading fast, and the decades of generous imperial Austrian subsidy over. As Bologna's Teatro Comunale began to forge a new civic cultural image by championing Wagner as part of its cosmopolitan progressive image, the Fenice had no Italian premiere of either a native or foreign work between 1859 and 1880. However, attempts to create a more innovative program were given a boost by the Ring Cycle, the Neumann Tour. Unlike other theatres which had been municipalized following the collapse of the old regimes, it remained a private society. Increasingly, the conservative tastes of many of the palchisti, who considered a mixed program of grand opera and ballet a part of their contract with the theatre, came into conflict with the changing tastes of the cultural elite and the civic and economic policies of the comune. The directors of the Fenice and the wider group of box holders were highly integrated with the membership of the Consiglio Comunale and successive giunte under each mayor, bridging the transition from Fornoni through to Grimani. However, the records of the meetings of the Consiglio Comunale, the proceedings of the Society of the Fenice, and local press reports reveal a predominance of moderate liberal and clerical opinion among the Fenice box holders and directors. And going through the lists from this period, from the Atti del Consiglio Comunale, you can very clearly see both in through elections and through debates, the positions that people are taking, and then obviously cross-reference those with some of the press reports about who box holders were and the records of the meetings of the Fenice. A clear antipathy emerges towards the management and membership of the Fenice by leading progressisti, including Selvatico, Bordiga and Tecchio, few of whom were prominent box holders. Conversely, Filippo Grimani himself was an active box holder who became torn between his loyalty to the theatre and exasperation at its inability to mount financially sustainable seasons. Other prominent palchistian directors included the Papadopoli brothers, Niccolo and Angelo, the industrialist and clerical Pacifico Ceresa, and Giancarlo Stucchi. And many of these key figures were also leaders of Venetian religious and philanthropic organizations. And there's Pacifico Ceresa, whose monument in San Michele I literally tripped over one day, and it is pretty much the largest monument on the island. As well as the main political and Catholic divides, Jewish Venetians were represented in both conservative and moderate regimes in Venice, for example, Prospero Ascoli and Graziano Ravà. Angelo Levi was both consigliere and Fenice member, and Marco Sulam was direttore degli spettacoli at the turn of the century, while his brother Benedetto was also an active box holder. Numerous other Jewish families were represented among the palchisti, for example, Amedeo Grassini, a conservative intimate of Patriarch Sarto, and also father of Margherita Sarfatti. So the Fenice's difficulties came to a head just as the political forces in Venice were realigned. Already in April 1888, the Fenice supporters clashed with opponents of a municipal subsidy who argued that the priority to reduce the burden on the poor should take precedence over subsidizing the self-interest of the rich. But spread between both clericals and radicals who took this view, with the proponents of the subsidy seen as self-serving box holders of the theatre, particularly Assessore Ludovico Valmarana, whose brother Giuseppe was at the same time Fenice president. And interestingly, Barbara di Valmarana, the Contessa, is still the president of the Friends of the Fenice, so they're still running the place. Antonio Saccardo led the charge against subsidizing the rich members of the Fenice, saying the theatre should be perfectly able to finance a season through its own means, if it were to drop the expense of ballets or prostitution, which is ballet. Senator Fornoni, Fenice director himself as well as former mayor, rebutted these criticisms, suggesting that opening Venice's Teatro Massimo would improve the moral spirit of Venetian youth. Following the elections of 1889, Sindaco Tiepolo's own support for the Fenice became subject of dissent, partly leading to his resignation and his replacement by Selvatico. And thereafter, the Fenice received no regular grants until the administration changed again in 1895, and Grimani took over. And under the clerical moderate alliance, this ostensibly strengthened the position of the theatre's supporters, with its most prominent conservative box holders, for example, Ceresa, elected at the top of the ballot. By 1897, the new junta had negotiated a municipal commission to jointly agree a subsidy for the main Carnival Quaresima season for the rather meagre sum of 15,000 lira out of a canone of 60,000 lira, so much smaller proportion than had been the case in previous decades. And the commission issued notices jointly inviting proposals from impresari, and having equal say in choosing repertoire and artists and the impresario. And the second iteration of the commission in 1901, stipulating that they wanted, in terms of repertoire, one Wagner, one Verdi, and one modern repertoire, for example, Azrael by Franchetti or Tosca. Grimani argued strongly that the Comune had a responsibility to support music, both on economic grounds, the prestige it brought to the city, and for the educational moral value. Tecchio, the anti-clerical scourge of the previous administration, countered that he saw little in educative value in these performances. I quote, "And to illustrate this, it is enough to see the behaviour of the public at the Fenice and the way in which they listen to the music. You can't witness it or tolerate their lack of attention. These people who've come to listen, thus disturbing the religion of art which should reign in this atmosphere, which becomes instead a literary meeting, a salon entertainment." So during this interlude between financial crises at the theatre, the clerical party was given further cause to flock to the Fenice, now for the premiere of a slew of oratorios by Lorenzo Perosi, maestro of the Cappella Marciana. The preparation, rehearsal and performance of these works in Venice and beyond were detailed in La Difesa almost daily during 1898 and 99. The text printed in full and long critical pieces on the priest-composer's music, a level of coverage for a composer in Venice matched only by the Parsifal premiere in 1914. Perosi with Toscanini and a letter that he wrote in thanking the Fenice. I'll come to the quote in a minute. His subject matter, the passion and transfiguration of Christ, universal judgment and resurrection, and biblical miracles, all tended towards the mystical and transcendental, much nearer to the treatment of such themes by Wagner than earlier oratorio. Perosi himself had said that after listening to the Ring Cycle and Parsifal, one could not compose anything further, and many critics felt that the theatre was the natural home for his style. In 1898, the Fenice, supported by Sindaco Grimani, gave premieres of two Perosi oratorios as a special summer season, and the La Trasfigurazione di Cristo and La Risurrezione di Lazzaro. The audience at the premiere of Lazzaro applauded so noisily that Perosi had to ask for silence. Their success was such that a third was inserted the following spring, alongside such theologically sound works as Boito's Mefistofele and Sansone e Dalila. If anything, the response to the Cristo at the Fenice was even warmer than its predecessors, and performances were scheduled for Holy Week, including on Easter Sunday. And his popularity reputedly led Mascagni to comment to Puccini, "If this one starts writing opera, we're toast." On a civic level, however, Perosi's importance in Venice laid bare once again the religious divide at the heart of Venetian politics. Castellani, one of the two councillors appointed to the commission overseeing the Fenice season, proposed that the city officially honour the priest-composer, which prompted Selvatico to complain that Perosi was not actually Venetian. Clerical moderates, including Grimani, all spoke in favour of this honour, one pointing out that a similar gesture had been made the previous year to the actress Eleonora Duse, whom Selvatico corresponded with and who obviously inhabited a dramatic world with which he was far more comfortable than the Fenice. Perosi's Catholic supporters, on the other hand, saw him as rescuing the theatre from modern tendencies. "You have reclaimed before the public the divine figure of Christ. You have shown us God in this miracle and man on earth, accompanied by the most tender melodies. You've given a sermon more sublime than words alone. It isn't therefore incongruous to have the figure of Christ in the theatre. The passion and the mysteries were the beginnings of the theatre, which is now degenerate. So during this period, it's clear from the reception of other operas, which I'll come to, particularly at La Fenice, that the Venetian cultural elite was searching after new works to suit the changing tastes of the middle classes at a time when the elite were anxious to reinforce traditional Catholic values while also seeming cosmopolitan and international and maintaining Venice's status. While Meyerbeer was still popular into the 1890s, it was seen as increasingly old-fashioned compared to Wagner, though the religious aspects of his operas, for example in Dinora, were praised for their moral qualities by the Catholic press. Quote, "This opera, rich in prayer scenes, is capable of making the faithful purer and giving the faithful a little belief." Conversely, the editor of the moderate liberal newspaper La Gazzetta was scathing about its musical and poetic qualities in comparison to Wagner, making an analogy between the archaicism of Metastasio with the contemporary poetry of the anti-clerical Carducci. Of the depiction of the Celestial in an experimental setting of Il Paradiso e la Peri by the young Venetian composer Serena Giotto, Il Gazzettino gave a warm and encouraging review without any sense of incongruity between its mystical, allegorical setting and the verismo Easter themes of the one-act opera with which it was paired that evening, Cavalleria Rusticana. Conversely, in the following season, the Venetian premiere of Franchetti's Faust-inspired Azrael, the stage depiction of heaven and hell became a point of intrigue and ridicule. The staging was fairly well done, although it was impossible to avoid laughing when the scene was trying to represent heaven. At the following performance, there was the usual cream of Venice society. The gallery was packed with people wanting to see how heaven and hell were staged. We repeatedly find in this period the Venetian press highlighting elements of the music, text and staging of new and revived works which emphasize sacred, spiritual and religious qualities and reporting audience approval of them. Another example is the Venetian Francesco Gin's opera Il Santo, which was commissioned, which was performed for the Biennale in 1903, supported with a subsidy from the Comune. Not unlike Azrael, it sets the battle between good and evil on a terrestrial plane, also with a celestial scene in heaven, pitching angels against demons. Previewing the libretto, La Difesa commented that the librettist has tried to place in a new light the eternal battle between good and evil, between the principles of good and evil. Maestro Gin has given us a work rich in indescribable treasures which will remain in the heart. He has wanted to employ a theme on a grand scale and high moral plane. Above all, worthy of note is the meaning contained in the portrayal of the figure of Satan. It was also warmly received, incidentally, by the anti-clerical L'Adriatico. So if we return to where this chapter began, the Venetian premiere of Parsifal at La Fenice in 1914, we see that many of the characteristics of the relationship between opera and religion during the previous quarter century are drawn together in this last great season at the theatre before the First World War. As mentioned earlier, Parsifal's premiere was set for the 12th of April, also Easter Sunday, something which was considered appropriate for a profound work about the suffering of the Redeemer. Pietro Spiga and Mariano Fortuny were responsible for staging the production and the innovative lighting, and the press was full of hope that the Fenice would outshine or at least match the other Italian Parsifal stagings, particularly that at La Scala in Milan. The complexity of the technical challenges and demands of the production, however, thwarted the planned premiere for Easter Sunday. The dress rehearsal on Saturday the 11th of April clearly didn't go well and led Spiga to delay the opening until Tuesday the 14th, which clearly disappointed those like La Gazzetta who were pleased by the scheduling of Parsifal for Easter Sunday itself. This is a tiny little note which hasn't been picked up in the Fenice chronology until you start looking at the newspapers. The premiere itself was greeted with unprecedented enthusiasm, with the spiritual and religious aspects of both the work itself and the experience of watching it in the theatre being prominent within the critical response. The anti-clerical L'Adriatico commented that the audience waited for the opening of the prelude with a religious silence, and it praised the execution and effect of the religious rites of the Grail Hall and choral singing in Act 1. La Difesa naturally highlighted the philosophical genesis of the work in the Catholic tradition. The Christian ideal can also inspire and enrapture the imagination of non-believers and non-Catholics like Wagner. Parsifal is a solemn homage not only to the Christian ideal, but also to the Catholic faith from a Lutheran. So, to conclude, This period of La Fenice's history shines a new light, I think, on the significance of opera within the wider culture and religious conflicts in liberal Italy. How the growing receptiveness to themes of transcendence and spirituality in opera coincided with the changing contours of the conflict between church and state. Religious themes could be read and interpreted positively or negatively from a variety of perspectives. And importantly, how the religious, cultural, political history and identity of Venice refracts these debates in a particularly rich pattern relevant to our transnational theme. Thank you very much.